Hello, folks. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Each and every week, we bring you at least one legal analysis of a story related to politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture to empower the African American community with the information it needs to nullify systemic racism and to defy an unjust legal system. If that interests you, please subscribe, like, share, comment, help us grow this channel. My simple question this evening is, what's wrong with Black conservative men? And I'm talking about two in particular, although there are many out here saying some reckless stuff. But I'm talking about two in particular. One, Justice Clarence Thomas. Two, Senator Tim Scott. I want to start with Justice Clarence Thomas. And by the way, I have read several books on Justice Thomas. This is one of them. This book was written about him. The other one was written by him. As an attorney, I have read many of his opinions. I remember in law school, we spent a lot of time talking about Clarence Thomas's opinions. So I know a little bit about the man. I'm not commenting based on what I've heard on TV or YouTube. No, I've kind of got to know his jurisprudence and his worldview, again, by the books I've read, most importantly, the cases that he has written while on the court. So I believe I can offer you an informed decision about Justice Thomas. Now, there have been times where I have somewhat respected Justice Thomas because when I read his book, can't think of the book that he wrote, but it had a lot to do with his grandfather. His grandfather actually reminded me of my father. Southern, hardworking, no-nonsense men who kept their nose to the grind and just worked hard. That was what they knew. That's all they knew. They grew up during the real harsh days of Jim Crow. They didn't necessarily fight the system. They just worked and did the right thing. And they insisted that their children do the right thing. That was the type of man that I was raised under too. Shout out to my father, the late Oscar Corbett. Again, the hardest working man I have ever known in my life. My father would get up 4 o'clock each morning. He would oftentimes be at his job, which was always an outside type job. He only had a 3rd grade education. So he didn't have the education to work inside. He always worked outside with his hands. But he would be at his jobs before his supervisors or managers were at the job site. He was always there first, and he always stayed last. When he retired some years ago, and I spoke with the office manager of the place that he worked, she said that he worked so hard that sometimes they were just somewhat afraid because he had gotten elderly and he was out there trying to outwork those young men, sometimes 6 days a week. That was the type of man that I grew up under. And that was the type of man that Clarence Thomas grew up under, his grandfather. So I understand some of Thomas's values as he relayed those values in his book. But there have been some things to come out here recently about Justice Thomas that are deeply troubling. When I used to read his opinions, in almost every instance, he sided against the African American community and for the white community, especially the white conservative community. In almost every instance, every one, every time. So it is very disturbing to hear these reports that have come out of ProPublica about Justice Thomas receiving money and gifts and favors from very wealthy white conservatives. It all looks like Justice Thomas was not ruling the way he was ruling because of principles given to him by his grandfather. It seems like he was actually being paid off. Really being paid off in a big time way. So here's this last story that has come out about Justice Thomas, again in ProPublica. And I want to show you a little bit of this story. This very disturbing story, extremely disturbing. So this story here, published again by ProPublica, let's just read it. First of all, look at the picture. This is Justice Thomas and one of the Koch brothers. I think this may be David Koch. I know the gentleman in the middle as well. He produces short films for PBS, but I can't think of his name. I think it's Ken something. Excuse me if I got his name wrong. But here they are at one of the Koch brothers' fundraisers. Justice Thomas lends his name, his prestige, his influence to a white conservative organization's fundraising efforts. That is just amazing for a man who sits on the highest court. And many of these people have cases who come in front of him. How can he ever claim to be impartial when he's receiving these kinds of favors and gifts from litigants who are having cases in front of him, either directly or indirectly? I mean, it just looks like everything Clarence Thomas talks about as being, again, a set of principles, conservative principles. It just looks like he has been doing it for the money. Looks like he's been doing it to profit. That is extremely concerning for a Supreme Court justice. Let's read some of this. On January 25th, 2018, dozens of private jets descended on Palm Springs International Airport. Some of the richest people in the country were arriving for the annual Winter Donor Summit of the Koch Network, the political organization founded by libertarian billionaires Charles and David Koch. A long weekend of strategizing, relaxation in the California sun and high-dollar fundraising lay ahead. Just after 6 p.m., a Gulfstream G200 jet touched down on the tarmac. One of the Koch network's most powerful allies was on board, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. At a Koch brothers donor fundraising event, one of the 9 people who sit on the U.S. Supreme Court. And again, this organization raises money for conservative efforts that are oftentimes in front of Justice Thomas. How can he be impartial? How can he be fair to the person who is opposing the conservative position of these organizations? How can that person ever feel like he's going to get a fair hearing from Justice Thomas when Justice Thomas is receiving gifts and favors from the donors, from the folks who are contributing to these conservative issues, who are contributing to the organizations that are putting cases in front of the court? That's fundamentally unfair. That's almost like bribing somebody. Keep reading. During the summit, the justice went to a private dinner for the network's donors. Thomas has attended Koch donor events at least twice over the years, according to interviews with 3 former network employees and 1 major donor. The justice was brought in to speak, staffers said, in the hopes that such access would encourage donors to continue giving. So he was there to help raise money, again, for an organization that financed a lot of the conservative issues that control our nation. That puts Thomas in the extraordinary position of having served as a fundraising draw for a network that has brought cases before the Supreme Court, including one of the most closely watched of the upcoming term. This is sad to me. This is really concerning, deeply, deeply disappointing that Justice Thomas is apparently being paid off like this. So the question then becomes, has this whole thing been about profiting off the backs of African Americans? Because a lot of these conservative issues that come before the court are harmful and dangerous to African Americans, like voter suppression issues, racial gerrymandering issues, poverty type issues, issues that, again, have a huge impact on the African American community, affirmative action, and so on. And these organizations finance those efforts. And here, one of the members of the court is helping them raise money. It's just disappointing to learn that Justice Thomas is apparently, again, being paid off in this way. Let's look at a little more here. In a series of stories this year, ProPublica reported that Thomas has accepted undisclosed luxury travel from Crow. Crow is a Dallas billionaire. And not only has he accepted luxury travel, but Crow also purchased Thomas's mother's home and paid private school tuition for the child Thomas was raising as his son. Thomas has said little in response. In a statement earlier this year, he said that Crow is a close friend whom he has joined on family trips. He has also argued that he was not required to disclose the free vacations. Thomas did not respond to questions for this story. Watch this. The Code of Conduct for the Federal Judiciary lays out rules designed to preserve judges' impartiality and independence, which it calls, quote, indispensable to justice in our society, close quote. The code specifically prohibits both political activity and participation in fundraising. Judges are advised, for instance, not to, quote, associate themselves, close quote, with any group, quote, publicly identified with controversial legal, social, or political positions, close quote. So that's the code of conduct for federal judges. But the next paragraph tells us, but the code of conduct only applies to the lower courts. At the Supreme Court, justices decide what's appropriate for themselves. So there is no code of conduct for members of the highest court. They have a lifetime appointment and they have nothing in place to hold them accountable unless they do something that rises to the high level that warrants impeachment. And in this political climate, they could about do anything and not be impeached. Notice what this retired federal judge said. He said, quote, I can't imagine. It takes my breath away, frankly, that he would go to a Koch network event for donors, close quote, said John E. Jones III, a retired federal judge appointed by President George W. Bush. Jones said that if he had gone to a Koch summit as a district judge, quote, I've gotten a letter that would have commenced a disciplinary proceeding. Close quote. That's how deep this is. This retired federal judge, a Bush appointee, no less. In other words, who agrees with Thomas on nearly all of Thomas's ideological worldviews. But even he said that it would have cost him his job, or it would have cost him his reputation had he attended one of these fundraisers. But the difference is, justices on the highest court are unaccountable. That's amazing. And as an African American, to see Justice Thomas sit there year after year after year after year after year, concurring or writing opinions that do great harm to the African American community, is just head shaking, head scratching. It's amazing. He will undoubtedly go down in history, at least African American history, as a black man who did maybe the most damage to the African American community. That will be his legacy. Of course, with white conservatives, he will be celebrated because he helped them promote their white supremacist views. And it's the reason I asked the question, what's wrong with black conservative men? What's wrong with them? That said, let's move now to Tim Scott. And let's start by listening to Tim Scott say some things that, again, are just head scratchers. Let's go.
There is not a redeeming quality in slavery. He and Kamala should have just taken the one sentence out. America has suffered.
So let's give him some kudos for saying that, right? This had to do with the dust up that occurred in Florida when Florida released some educational standards that said there were some personal benefits that African Americans who were enslaved received from being enslaved, which is ludicrous. But this is what they teach in Florida schools now. Tim Scott challenged that notion, and I give him kudos for that.
Suffered because of slavery, but we've overcome that. We are the greatest nation on earth because we faced our demons in the mirror and made a decision. So often we think that all the issues.
We didn't face our demons in the mirror and made a decision. We fought a bloody civil war because of the issue of slavery. So that was not some mere moral decision. There were men who were willing to give the full measure, as Lincoln said, to continue enslaving African American people. And because those men were so determined to continue the enslavement of African American people, those men, once in power again, implemented another system that we call Jim Crow to keep African American people in enslavement. And when Jim Crow was dismantled, the descendants of those same Confederate people implemented systemic racism intended to continue enslaving African American people on some level. So I disagree with Tim Scott when he says we have overcome slavery. Go through any African American community and you will see remnants of enslavement. You will see the residue of 156 years of chattel slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, and current day systemic racism. In this country today, the average white family has 10 times the wealth of African American families. African American families have less than 3% of this nation's wealth, although we're about 10% of the population. And there are health disparities, there are other wealth disparities, there are education disparities, disparities across the board that are absolutely related to the last 400 years of racial oppression.
Police, they profile black men every day, Like, every day you go down the streets, they always acting like that we're the criminals, like we're the bad guys. They was taught that at a young age, that the darker a person's skin is, the more dangerous and the more bad looking and more bad of a person is. While, the white people are superior and the good people, You go in the courthouses and all of the white people are the police officers, the lawyers, the judges, aka the good people. But then the black people are the bad people, the criminals, the one that's on trial being judged. Now, it's mighty funny that I don't think that all black people are bad, and I don't think that all white people are good. But the way the system it looks like, it looks like all black people are bad. I mean, from my perspective, I don't know about any other person's perspective, but I think that they think that all black people are bad, and we're not. So when we come down the street, we're already profiled. So something has got to change about that situation.
Yet Tim Scott says that we've overcome, and he goes on to say,
You talked about crime and education and healthcare. We always think that those issues go back to slavery. Here's the challenge, though. Black families survived slavery. We survived poll taxes and literacy tests. We survived discrimination being woven into the laws of our country. What was hard to survive was Johnson's.
He acknowledged that discriminatory laws were woven into the fabric of our country. Now, that's quite an admission. And I believe he is saying that because he's trying to attract some black voters. But he goes on to undermine what he just said. In fact, he contradicted what he just said. Let's listen.
Great society where they decided to put money, where they decided to take the black father out of the household to get a check in the mail, and you can now measure that.
And by the way, if you do a close study of the welfare system that Tim Scott is talking about, you'll see that it was Southern states who implemented policies to drive fathers out of the home. And that was because initially African-American people were not receiving welfare. But when Southern states began to give African-American families welfare, that was the response of Southern states, that the men could not be in the home. So it sounds like the way Tim Scott and Larry Elder talks about this, that Lyndon Johnson implemented a program or some initiatives to drive black fathers out of the family. It was Southern states who were controlled by white conservatives who did that. Just do your research. These people say these things because they know the average American is not going to do their research. And so they're able to get away with it if they just keep saying it. But it's not true. This is wrong. There are other reasons why 3 out of 4 African-American children are born out of wedlock. It does not have anything to do with a welfare system or the fact that African-Americans began to get welfare in the 60s and 70s. That's 50 years ago. That is not the reason why we see high out-of-wedlock births for African-American children. Tim Scott is wrong about that.
And unemployment and crime and devastation. If you want to restore hope, you've got to restore the family.
The reason there's crime and devastation and health disparities and wealth disparities in the African-American community is because of systemic racism. It's because of what Tim Scott acknowledged. Discriminatory laws woven in the fabric of our nation. That's what he said. And that is true. But he, while saying that, while throwing that out, I think for some black voters, he knows he got to stay on message because he's trying in these primaries to attract white conservative voters. So he has to undo what he just said to make them happy. So notice what he says.
Restore capitalism and put Americans back at work together as one American family. Our nation continues to go in the right direction. It's why I can say I have been discriminated against, but America is not a racist country. Never, ever doubt who we are. We are the greatest country on God's green earth.
How can these two things be true at the same time? Discriminatory laws being written in the fabric of our nation. That's what Tim Scott said. And then he turns around and says that America is not a racist nation. Now, when he says that discriminatory laws are written in the fabric of our nation, that's critical race theory. That is a tenet of critical race theory. So he actually endorsed a major tenet of critical race theory when he admitted that. But then he comes back and says, but America is not a racist nation. How can the two be true? If the nation's laws are racist and discriminatory in the very fabric of the nation, why then can you say, or how can you say that the nation is not a racist nation? That makes no sense. That is contradictory. Because he knows, he just let it slip out, that the very fabric of this nation consists of discriminatory and racist laws. He knows that. But he has to say the other stuff in order to get white conservative voters. That is sad. So he's doing what he's doing to get votes, and he's also profiting very, very well from taking the positions that he takes. And his colleague, or one of his brothers, Clarence Thomas, appears to be doing and saying what he says and does for profit. Now, don't get angry with me because I'm acknowledging what is being reported and has now been acknowledged by Justice Thomas, that he has received these favors and gifts from very wealthy white conservatives who indirectly finance organizations that bring cases in front of the court. So they know how Justice Thomas is going to vote because they have been gifting him various things. They know they got that vote. They know he's on their team. And if you are not on their team and you are one of the attorneys representing the other side, you know Justice Thomas is bought and paid for. And once again, as an African American, that's distressing because most of those white conservative initiatives that comes to the court, those cases that makes their way to the U.S. Supreme Court, are to undo many of the civil rights that African Americans have won over the last 50 or 60 years. It's deeply, deeply troubling. For example, the man who spearheaded the attack on affirmative action is now attacking corporate diversity. So now he doesn't want corporations to do what's necessary to promote diversity in their workforce, in management. So he gets those cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. He is perhaps being financed by some of that Coke money, some of the money from Coke's network. And Thomas was a part of those fundraising efforts. He knows he got at least one vote. He knows that. He knows Thomas is not going to go off the beaten trail because he has been gifted all sorts of things. But not only does he have Thomas's vote, he has 5 other votes. But just to see this African-American man from the South do his people that way is why I asked the question, what's wrong with Black conservative men? And this comes from a man who is center right. I'm center right. I was a Republican for 20 years. I was a Democrat for 20 years. And the last 20 years, I've been independent because I despise both parties for various things. That's why I'm not a part of either one. I left the Republican Party because of white supremacy. I left the Democrat Party because I didn't like some of their liberal policies. And so today I'm an independent. So I'm not some liberal leftist criticizing Justice Thomas. I told you. I've read many of his opinions, and some of the things that he said, I agreed with. I thought they were coming from the principles that his grandfather raised him with. Turns out he's voting consistent with the folks who are writing the checks. That's sad. Anyway, I'm Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. And again, we bring you a legal analysis every week, at least one, sometimes 2 or 3, to give you the information you need to defy an unjust legal system. This legal system is unjust. You see what I'm saying? I just sit here and talk about it. When you have folks on the highest court who are not accountable to anything or anyone, who are being paid and bought for by rich billionaires on both sides, it's an unjust legal system. We also give you the information to nullify systemic racism. That's you. That's what you're about. If you see the importance of that, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Until the next time, you have a good one. Bye. In 1962, I was born in Mount Kisco, New York, to a young mother. She was originally from North Carolina. She was too young to rear my sister and I, so she took me back to North Carolina, where her older sister raised me. This was in the 60s. North Carolina at that time was segregated. Blacks were treated as second-class citizens. There were separate water fountains. If we went to the doctor, the whites went in one door, the blacks went in the next door. Times were tough. Segregation and sharecropping was what my family knew. In fact, my grandmother mother and father, aunts, uncles, a lot of them had been sharecroppers or were still sharecroppers as I was growing up. 50 years later, by the grace of God, I was able to rise from all of that to become an ordained minister, a licensed attorney, an author, an activist, and to fight for something that is very dear to me, and that's justice. You don't grow up the way I grew up and see the things that I saw, and justice not be a big part of who you are. A lot of people don't know what justice means. For me, justice is a biblical concept. Humans didn't create the concept of justice. Justice, simply defined, is protecting and defending the weak and vulnerable. Fighting for the weak and vulnerable. Oftentimes that fight results in protest. Other times that fight results in lobbying. Still other times that fight occurs inside courtrooms. And that's where Corbett and Corbett comes in. We take the fight for justice inside the courtrooms. We fight for our personal injury clients when they're injured at no fault of their own. Sometimes we're able to get them good settlements. Other times, again, we have to take the fight inside the courtroom, which we enjoy doing. We also fight for those who've been accused of crimes. And that fight occurs inside the courtroom as well. Because it's in the courtroom that we defend the rights of the accused. In other words, we fight for justice, even for those who are accused of crimes. They have certain constitutional rights, and we fight to defend those rights. A part of our firm also involves representing those who are in the midst of divorces or fighting for custody of a child. Whether it's personal injury, criminal defense, or family law, for us, it is a fight of justice. And because of my background, it's a fight that I take personal.